Hello witches, and welcome back to A Coven of Two, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they, and in today's video I'm gonna tell you a bit about my relationship with Venus, Aphrodite, who is the second deity that I work with, my second patron deity. And we're gonna go a bit in the myths, although not so much in the story themselves because they're quite famous, so mostly of how I read them. Then we're gonna go personal on how I started working with her, what are my daily rituals, how I put together her altar, and we'll go a bit into books about her history, but also the work with her in neo-paganism. Sounds good? But before we get started, let me mention that I've opened a Ko-fi, which is basically an alternative to Patreon that takes less from creators. And on there you can do a one-off donation or a monthly subscription donation to support the work that I do here. And you can also get tarot readings, donate what you can from £5 onwards, and you can get a tarot reading with me, Italian style. So if you would like to support what I do here, you can head on to Ko-fi, and if you do so, thank you so much. Right, let's see how long I can make this one. Venus, Aphrodite, is one of the, I guess, most popular goddesses in general, beside neo-paganism. So myths are 10 a penny, I reckon. So there are two main Genesis myths of her. One is she was born out of the severed genitals of Uranus, the original deity of the sky. Cronus, which we talked about in the Vesta video, who was their son, put up to it by his mother Gaia, fight with his father, wins over his father, cuts off his genitals, the genitals fall into the sea, and travel in the sea a bit actually like that, and then with the foam give birth to this beautiful creature that comes out of the sea. Note, when it's sea, you directly have the sky on top of it, and that's part of the reason why Aphrodite, Venus, is considered a goddess both of the sky and the sea. And she lands in Cyprus, and she is this deity, fully formed, beautiful. She walks and flowers grow wherever she has walked. And for simplicity, like the Primavera of Botticelli, not the Primavera, the birth of Venus. Yes, the Primavera is clearly also inspired by you, I agree, because it looks like you. But the Venus of Botticelli, to give an example, represents that kind of origin myth. And that's according to Hesiod. According to Homer, and how she's described in the Homeric hymns and in the Iliad, she's actually the daughter of Zeus and Dione. And Dione is supposed to be a deity of the sea, Zeus, god of the sky. See the references there, the connections. And so she's the daughter of these two deities. So in a way, either comes from the previous generation, the generation before Zeus, because Zeus then is going to be the son of Chrono and along with most of the Olympians. So technically, if Aphrodite comes from parts of the body of Uranus, comes from the generation even before the other Olympians. So if that is the case, Aphrodite would actually predate the Olympians because she would come from the generation of Uranus, so the generation before Zeus. She would be equivalent to Chrono, which is the father of Zeus and most of the other Olympians. And otherwise, she's considered the daughter of Zeus. Now, you know the myths, she's involved in the War of Troy, because when the golden apple is thrown by Ares to be addressed to the fairest of them all, there's actually the fight between Aphrodite, Athena, and Hera. Of course, this is for me. No, of course, this is for me. And of course, goddess of beauty. She rightfully had some investment in this, and therefore, technically, the War of Troy exists because, along with various promises, Aphrodite said to Paris, supposedly, allegedly, well, you choose me and you give me the golden apple, and I will give you the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, which happens to be of Sparta and wife of Menelaus, but we'll overlook this. 10 years later, war. So she could be one of the culprits of this. And there's also the myth with Adonis, there's the myth with Psyche, and with those, there starts to be a peculiar kind of trend, tendency, where possibly because she's identified with the quintessential feminine, she also seems to carry these traits that are not only persuasive, but sometimes manipulative, sometimes catty, sometimes petty. But you know, of the one that, of course, amongst all beauty and amongst all women will always win. And if you ask me, that is an incredibly, you guessed it, patriarchal way to look at things. I'm saying that because something that was noticeable to me was that these kind of myths that make her very vain in a way also happen to be written by men. We have Apollodorus, who wrote the Golden Arts and the myth of Psyche is there. There's Hesiod, there's the writers of Homer, or that wrote under what we understand today as Homer, but those were all men. And they all have this vision of her that she's beautiful, amazing, and desirable, but also literally written in the Iliad by the word of Zeus to her is, worry about love, not about war. Don't worry your pretty head about war. When she gets onto the battlefield to try and save Aeneas, which is technically her son, from the attack of Diomedes, then she gets hurt, and when she's brought back to Olympus, Zeus, supposedly her father in this vision, tells her, see, my darling, my child, you shouldn't worry your pretty head with war. You're much better suited for love, not for war. Doesn't it remind you a little bit of the benevolent sexism that we talked about in the Maiden Mother Crone? Because it does to me. The only writer that we have still material that got to us that talks to her and about her in a different way, in an incredibly devoted way, but also without all these double entendre, this double-sided vision of, oh, she can be so much, but she can be such a troublemaker, is Sappho of Lesbos fame, the quintessential, we have named gay women lesbians because of her. And Sappho, when she refers to Aphrodite, is always in a way of, you understand the suffering of love, you understand the need that I have, to the point that in one of the fragments that we have of her poems, Aphrodite is written down as replying to her, and she's understanding, she is helpful, she doesn't have, through the words of Sappho, those qualities that have been ascribed to Aphrodite by all those previous writers who also happen to be men. So here's my first take on Aphrodite/Venus. A lot of the supposed energy that it's been attributed to her, for which she's seen as, again, at times petty as catty. I don't think she is. She knows what she wants, and that's unquestionable. But those qualities that are assigned to the infight, realistically, of women, where a woman wins over other women because she has these innate qualities of beauty, of grace, I don't think is something that comes necessarily from her. This is my very personal interpretation, UPG, and all that. But what stood out to me first thing when I actually went into, okay, what's the information that we have historically, mythologically? It's all these men that with one word, with one breath, elevate her beauty and her grace, and with the other try to keep her down, and you're just good to be looked at. see the myth where she's found with Ares, Mars, but don't worry yourself with more serious things like going into battle to try and save your son. In the myth of Adonis, she ends up having to fight with Persephone, so these two women catty with each other. In the myth with Psyche, again, she's this horrible mother-in-law that basically almost pushes Psyche to die just because she's supposedly jealous of her son. I mean, it's stuff that not even on No Mother-in-Laws on Reddit you find and read. So it's peculiar that the goddess of love, of all things, would also have this kind of behavior. At the same time, I am one of those that, given the option, the archaeological, philological options, I kinda understand the idea that Aphrodite might come from the Near East, so Mesopotamia with Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte for the Phoenicians, where these strong feelings and sentiments were at the origin of both love and war. And there's a lot even just in the Greek vocabulary. There's mixes. She's the goddess of mixes, which is bodies mingling. Whether for sex or for war in battle, the word is the same. So for those reasons, I do appreciate that she's the goddess of very strong feelings and emotions. And that can go in either direction. And I also understand because of that why she is considered born from water. I adhere much more to the idea that she's born from the mutilation of Uranus from the sea, so from the sky that touches the sea, because also when you go into the alchemical consideration of the elements, also the four elements like that in Witchcraft we call for the quarters, for when we cast a circle, well, water is west, is emotions. Even in the tarot, the suit of cups represents water and therefore represent emotions. And I can totally see how she is ruling over all of that, is this strong sense of emotion and need. And genuinely in the work of Sappho, you can tell that that's what she's talking about. And that's why of all the myths and all the ways that Aphrodite is talked about in ancient Greece, I adhere the most to Sappho. Might be biased, but... In her Roman syncretization to Venus, she gets involved right from the start. So if you remember, I went through the myth origin of Rome in the video about Vesta. Venus is involved in that as well. The story of the origin of Rome goes, Rhea Silva is this princess of Alba Longa, and Alba Longa supposedly has been founded by Aeneas, who fled from Troy with the embers of Troy with his father Anchises on his shoulders. One of the Homeric hymns talks about the origins of Aeneas, because with the fact that Venus, Aphrodite, could inspire love in everyone except Artemis, Athena, and Hestia, Zeus at some point got a bit bothered by this and decided, aha, an eye for an eye, and so inspired her to love Anchises, which at the time was just a cattle minder, a shepherd. She goes to visit Anchises, she lays with him, and then she brings him a son who is Aeneas. So Aeneas is the son of Venus, the son of Aphrodite. When Aeneas escapes Troy and gets to Italy, finds Alba Longa, and his son is Julius. Because of that, and because then generations after Rhea Silva, there's all the drama. Her uncle wants the throne, so forces her to become a Vestal Virgin, but she gets pregnant by Mars, the god Mars. She has two twins, Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus eventually go and found Rome. Because of this connection, Julius Caesar, the actual existing emperor/dictator of Rome, claimed to have Venus as one of his ancestors. His line was from Venus, because Julius Caesar is because his line came supposedly from Julius, the son of Aeneas. Aeneas was the son of Venus. There was a lot of attention to Venus in Rome. There were 2 or 3 festivals a year for her. And her side of being a goddess to go to when you also wanted to win the war was very, very present in Rome. Venus Victrix, the winner Venus, is an aspect that was very, very popular and considered the ancestry that Julius Caesar claimed was with Venus Victrix, so victorious in war. And again, as I said before, because my heritage is Italian, I think I naturally have an attraction, a drive towards the Roman pantheon. It might very well be because as a child being raised in Italy, I have just heard these things. Don't quote me because I don't necessarily remember it. I feel like I've been around it, but not necessarily. Despite the fall of Rome then in 410 and paganism is made illegal, unlike the other gods and the cult of other gods, Venus, I guess, remained in the imagination of people because she was the quintessential feminine. And so, despite how incredibly Christian Vatican, the Italian peninsula was and remained throughout the next millennia after the fall of Rome, having her in art, especially in the Renaissance, was simply made pass as the respect and appreciation of the quintessential feminine, which I think is the reason why, instead of necessarily having a lot of paintings or Renaissance statues of Athena or Juno, Minerva, you have them of Venus, but not necessarily of these other deities. And I think it's because at that point it was just conflated with femininity. There's also a point that I wanted to mention, because one of the books that then will go at the end into, which is In Devotion of Aphrodite, still mentioned how I had the feeling that because Venus, Aphrodite, is about love and beauty, it's about the weak side of women, and I didn't want to identify in that. And the idea that beauty is something superficial, I mean, you know, the stuff like beauty is only skin deep. I think, ironically, thinking that beauty is superficial is a very superficial take. Something that I thought about, and I think I saw it a few years ago, and then I realized it's already 5 years. Oh my goodness, where does time go? There's a video that Kurzgesagt did, which is, you know, all about science and understanding the framework of the world, really, which just talked about studies done on the importance of beauty, beauty in the scenery, beauty in architecture, how being around beautiful things makes people actually healthier, measurably healthier. So the idea that beauty is something superficial and something not essential, and let's worry about more serious things. I understand how it's a common view, but it's a very, very bizarre take to have. And I think it takes a moment. And especially because, again, Venus, Aphrodite is seen as the quintessential feminine. Something, oh my God, we're gonna go into feminism again. I didn't mean to, but it just occurred to me. So, I don't know if you've noticed. If you've been raised as a girl, you might have. Niceness, cuteness, taking care of yourself are things that are demanded of you, but to a certain degree. You have to worry about not seeming too vapid otherwise. And the split between what is asked and expected of you between girls and boys happens at identifying with your gender mates. If you're a boy, you're one of the boys. You're supposed to be one of the boys. If you're not like the other boys, there's something wrong with you. Usually something to do with going in the opposite direction according to culture, which is, you guessed it, femininity. So it's not good to be out of the perception of what your gender demands of you. If you're a girl, you have to hope and work to not be like the other girls. One of the best compliments you can receive, usually from men, is, oh, but you're not like the other girls. Implication, better. That is because in a patriarchal society, all those qualities that are identified as feminine are weak, unnecessary, are everything that the patriarchy demands, but also doesn't want for themselves. And to do good as a girl, as a woman, you need to elevate yourself from your gender mates. If you're just like the other girls, you're just another disposable thing. If you're with the boys, you want to aim to be with the boys. And if you get out of that circle, of that group, it's usually to go lower. Talking about double standards. In that perception, I do understand why the vision of Venus, Aphrodite being taken seriously for the power that beauty has, way beyond in getting what in antiquity must have been considered the maximum aspiration of a girl, which was finding a good husband based on your looks. No, the power of Venus goes so much beyond that that's a bit insulting. Oh, is that what you meant? If you think I'm crazy bringing in the patriarchy against Venus, not only I will bring up again the benevolent sexism, but I would also take note of the fact that going into 18th, 19th century, the most appreciated versions of Venus, the most replicated statue, was the Venus of Milo. The mutilated Venus, the Venus that has no arms. It's a beautiful statue, but it has no arms. She is by nature of the lack of arms bound. She is limited. And that's a male fantasy. There's nothing else but a male fantasy. And from being this quintessential, powerful goddess of strong sentiments that can lead to love or to war, to limit this force of nature to be appreciated the moment that she doesn't have the power to touch and do because she doesn't have any arms, and that's the version that they liked best. I'm starting to get why she's so resolute and not angry, but very, very on point in the way that she communicates with me and for what I've seen with other Venus, Aphrodite devotees. Because I would be mad too. She started off with her power being recognized as goddess of the sky and sea, of thought and emotion. I can bring people together in a way or another, whether it's in bed or it's in the battlefield, and in a way or another there will be blood. And from that being reduced to these things to be seen, but that she doesn't have to worry her pretty head with war, like Zeus said, that she doesn't even need hands because she's beautiful just to be looked at. Patriarchy loved Venus mutilated. And so I say that representing her power beyond beauty for the use and consume of man is the act of resistance. And that's what I try to do. Despite how Venus is seen as the quintessential feminine throughout history, by the male gaze, dare I say, by patriarchy, there is also a very important point for me as a non-binary person to appreciate her. Now, I don't know if you follow Vicky, the Aphrodisian witch, on Instagram, and they also have a podcast which is called Not Another Witch Podcast, which you can guess it by the name, the Aphrodisian witch. They work with Aphrodite. And something that I really liked them mentioning was how much of a queer deity Aphrodite is. And the queerness of Venus, of Aphrodite, is not just unverified personal gnosis of me or of Vicky. It's actually historically accurate. So there's George Pictor, who wrote in 1532 about this Latin author Macrobius, who recorded the existence of a Venus with a beard and a penis that existed on Cyprus, and to whom cross-dressing men and women would sacrifice to this bi-gender deity. This is the kind of stuff that I would always bring to TERFs when they think that transnet is something new. We have always been here. Hi. Also, let's never forget that one of the myths is also Aphrodite progeny by Hermes, which is hermaphrodito, with both sets of genitalia. Although PS, referring to intersex people today as hermaphrodites, not the correct term, not what we want to go for. I just find it interesting that historically, again, trans people, intersex people have always existed. This is not something new or horrific. Again, it was actually something elevated and of divine derivation. I'm not saying it, just historically. Speaking of which, how do I work with Venus? How did she come to my life? So, in a bit of a convoluted way, not necessarily for love or for beauty, or that wasn't necessarily my first interest and instinct. However, in my day life, in the last year or so, couple of years, I have started to write poetry again and perform it at spoken word nights here in Cardiff. And it's a work that spans decades for me, but I never shared it with an audience before. And so when I started to do that, I don't know. That tends to be the main thing that I say when I actually have to say, why? I knew that I needed to go to her, but why? I don't know. I just knew, but I don't know. And so because I had written pieces that I wanted to perform, and I wanted to be able to be inspired without suffer my inspiration, the depths that I need to go to write good things, which is the point of poets, they say. Like, a poet delves into the abyss that is the human condition and is the one that comes back to tell the tale. I go in a lot of abysses to get there, and it's never by choice. Writing is a method to work through the fact that I'm down the abyss. It was never just for the spirit of creation. I never had that as an ambition. But because I've done it for so long, and then last year I started to perform and I started to have feedback in a very positive way, I was like, I think I read somewhere that she also has to do with poetry. If you ask me where, I wouldn't be able to point you. But that's what made me think, okay, I'm gonna do a spell with her. And I did a spell. I think it was the beginning of June or the end of May. The point is that Venus, also the planet, was very well dignified. So I was like, this is going to happen. And that day when I was coming home to do the spell, I had this light in my head: go get roses, go to the supermarket and get roses. It doesn't matter that they're supermarket roses, get roses. I was like, yeah, it's a good idea. It seems like a fair offering. So I go, I get roses. I am in the room that I've dedicated in this house to do spells for like an hour or something. And I ask her for inspiration, and I ask her for a healthy way to do this kind of work, basically, because that was a bit consuming at that point. And while I do the spell, I'm like, you know what? I will actually take these roses to the seaside. I will bring them to you tomorrow, so that actually the offering is for you, to you. And I do that the next day. I think there's actually pictures here of that happening. Bizarre thing about Cardiff is that it is a town on the seaside, but for how it is placed geographically, doesn't quite have a beach, which is very, very ironic. This is the closest bit of beach that we have here in Cardiff, between Cardiff and Penat. I went there to give her the flowers. I didn't necessarily plan at the time to just start to make an altar for her or start to work with her like I did with Vesta, because also, I felt like a very, very young witch in my practice. I remember hearing from the very beginning, oh, working with deities is something that you do down the line, you don't know what you're doing. I was like, yeah, fair enough. I'm just concerned about learning and the protection of my house and my family, so deity work is down the line. And then Vesta came to me in a time of great need and she helped me. And I guess that might have been the same thing that Venus decided to do. I don't know if she saw that I am very methodic with my dedication, so she was like, I could use some of that, I don't know. But I am methodic in that. And I didn't plan to necessarily continue. However, looking up things on charity shops, on eBay, I start to find these things that are all about her. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. On eBay, out of the blue, I don't even remember how, and not even searching for Aphrodite or anything like that, the statue that I have here, which is actually a lamp, shows up. 2 of them show up, and one costs too much. And this one, I had the doubt, because in the Homeric hymn, it is said that the power of Aphrodite does not affect Hestia, Artemis, and Athena. And some translations bring that as the reason why they don't like each other. So Artemis, Athena, Hestia, and Venus and Aphrodite don't like each other is because Aphrodite doesn't have this power over them, or that made me a bit worried. To the point that I asked some people that I know, was like, how do I know if it's okay or not? And I didn't. Realistically, I just had this feeling, and I don't know, maybe I'm too thorough, but I ordered this statue and this statue comes broken, and that I take as not necessarily good. So I almost shelved the idea of working with Venus until Raven actually one day I come home and I realize that the statue is fixed. Like she fixed it for me. I didn't know. And at the same time, there is still the vase, which is actually a candle holder, with the other roses that I didn't bring to the seaside, but that I offered to her for the spell. And meanwhile, other things that I've found in a charity shop are on the table, and I realize that they are all pastel. It's these candle holders. I'm like, they look so nice together, and I take a picture. And I swear, the harmony of this picture, I was like, this is really, really free. This is beautiful. So I was sort of tempted, but I don't know, but maybe Vesta is not gonna be happy, maybe they don't like each other. It's almost the end of June at this point. And let's say I have a creative endeavor that I think would be the kind of thing that Venus gives her patronage to. And accidentally, just before the end of June, I receive a huge donation for it. And I'm like, this is weird. The moment that happens, I turn to where the statue was and I was like, this is you. This is you, isn't it? Right, let's try this. If this happens, now that the month turns on July, okay, every month I'm gonna do one of these offerings for you. Lo and behold, the donation repeats on the 1st of July. Never before, never again. Fair, you do want to work with me, and who am I to disagree? And so I started to do, basically to make a piece of content every month for her. Then life got in the way, I got distracted, and for a month I didn't do it. Now I know that when you get into a deal with a deity, you make very well sure that you can follow through. So I skipped August. And around the 7th, 8th of September, I'm lighting her candles daily as I do, and I'm like, I have this feeling that you're not okay with me. I don't remember. I am the least sensitive witch in the world. I do not talk with spirits, I do not hear things. I'm just lighting my candles like every day, and I have this nagging feeling that the statue, the way that she looks at me, it's slightly bothered. And just in case, I'm like, I have this feeling. If you're bothered with me, can you let me know why in some way so that I can do something about it? By the next day or next 2 days, I am doing my monthly expenses and I realize, I kept my word July, but I didn't do it in August, and now it's the 9th of September. I have to make up for this. I made her a promise that every month I would have done this, and I haven't. So I try to catch up. It's not quite easy in September, I do it in October. And during October, or just after October, I then started to dedicate to her this tarot deck. Because it's all pastel-y as well, it's all very, very beautiful in the sense that I see beauty related to her. So I put it on the altar, I put the incense that I use for her daily on it physically, and I was like, this is dedicated to you now if you want to talk to me. And from the readings that I have got from her, she was like, yeah, you promised me this, and if you promised, I'm taking what you gave, but you promised you need to give. But I can see that this is stressing you out. I think there are other ways for you to honor me, which was very interesting, to say the least. I pushed myself through up until November, and then I was like, okay, fair enough. What are other ways in which I can honor you? And from what came out tarot-wise, it seems that my role in my community, with my friends, with pushing myself, being out with people in ways that I am not necessarily used to, was something that she was agreeable with. To the point that I think making these videos, it's something that she finds is still content that she is happy for me to do. When I started to work with her as well, I dedicated to her 2 pieces of jewelry. And one of them was literally dedicated to, please help me have the gift of the gab. So help me talk in public, help me when I perform my poetry in public. And every time that I was out in a situation where I had to either do poetry, or when I had to do a speech, or I don't know, when I held the trainings or workshops, I would wear this necklace, because it's the necklace that I dedicated to her, asking, can you help me when I have to do public speaking, basically. And now I've retired that necklace and I've just done everything with this, which is the abalone shell dedicated to her. But I genuinely still believe that every time that I have to perform, basically, and so to have like the glamour, the allure of a performer, I think she's the one that's behind it. I don't think I would do nearly as well if she wasn't blessing me with her persuasion in a way. Now, as you might have seen in the vlog, we can go into the beautiful, beautiful altar and I can explain what everything is and where it comes from. So the first bit was indeed the main statue, which also happens to be a lamp, but I got it again as an antique secondhand, and I never got the plug, so actually never lit up. But it's clearly inspired by the Venus of Botticelli coming out of the sea. She's simply dressed instead of being naked, but it has the shell behind. I was genuinely stunned about how beautiful this is, and the fact that I've never seen it before, never again. I couldn't find it online, but at the same time, when I was about to start working with her, there were 2 on eBay. So that was peculiar, to say the least. The statue in front of it is actually made of alabaster, and it's a miniature of the Venus Victrix of Pauline Bonaparte. Basically, she posed to have her sculpture made. She was supposed to pose as Diana, but that day she showed up like this, saying, no, I want to be Venus. And Pauline, yeah, go on then. The third statue is an Armani, and I've had my eye on it for a long time. Armani Capodimonte statues are quite prestigious. They come from Italy, and I liked this one because she's holding a dove. So it doesn't say anywhere that it's a Venus or Aphrodite statue, but to me it was clearly about her because she's holding a dove, and the dove is the bird of Venus. And ironically, I've read somewhere that Venus, Aphrodite, likes to have either multiple altars or multiple images of herself around. So I was worried at the beginning. I was like, why do I have 3 statues of her? Do I need to cut down? After reading that, I was like, oh no, she probably made me find them, and that's why I have 3 now. The candle holders are a vintage brand that used to do things inspired by art. These are inspired by Alphonse Mucha, whom I adore. And as you can tell, the vase is also Mucha inspired, just like it is my shirt today. There are specific images of Alphonse Mucha that I've accidentally started to associate with Venus and with Vesta. This specific girl, which is from a piece of Alphonse Mucha called Reverie, the Dream, I always associate with Venus, which is also why the vase also has this image on it. When there's this image, usually to me, it's related to Venus. I found this decoupage scallop shell in a witchy market actually a few months ago, and it had bees, and for some reason I also associated the bees to Venus. I don't know if it's an actual correspondence or not, but that seemed a good combination, so I got that, and I keep rose quartz in it because love. The vase with the flower and the pussy willows I actually found in a charity shop in Glastonbury, and it stood out a lot to me because it's so delicate and pastel-y, and I knew from the moment that I saw it that it went well with the altar of Venus, so I got it because of that. It's also just an artistic piece, like you can't put water in it, so it's literally just pretty. As if it was a just. There's a big abalone shell that I also found in a witchy market that has pebbles and shells that I found on a beach close to Cardiff, and so I hold them there. It used to be more, and they used to be in a specific shape, but I started to collect too many rocks. And one day while I was cleaning the altar, I also felt like it needs to be slimmed down, and so I put those aside and I'll bring them back to the sea when I go back to the sea. I have this jar which used to be a candle, and it just holds a lot of my pink salt so that it can be blessed by her. It's one of the elements that I use for my magic baths related to love, for my pink salt, although my pink salt also has rose petals, so it's not just literally the pink Himalayan salt. But when I use pink salt in magic workings, usually I use the one that is in that jar because it lives on her altar, so if it needs to be related to love, she's got it. The two velvet pink mushrooms I found at Primark during Christmas. Of all things that you expect to find for Christmas at Primark, mushrooms are not one of those. Bizarrely, a month or so before, I had found decorative mushrooms, just like red and white, at Lidl, and I got them for Vesta. So I genuinely believe that this was Venus saying, well, why does she get mushrooms and I don't? And I was like, you're very correct, and if I find the right mushroom, I will put it to you. And if that's not the right mushroom, I don't know what is. Now, on to books. The first approach that I personally had was on Bettany Hughes' Venus and Aphrodite, which is not a neo-pagan book, it's just historical with some personal anecdotes, because I think she's a researcher or an archaeologist, so it's really interesting to see how the cult of Aphrodite going then into the cult of Venus evolved, and what kind of artifacts we have that basically trace that evolution. So that was really fascinating from an historical point of view. And in a similar vein, there's also Aphrodite by Monica Cyrino, which is actually a lecturer in the University of New Mexico, and I think it's part of a collection on different deities. So I think there's one on Apollo, for example, which I need to read. It's basically taking the evolution of these deities, again, from a scholar point of view. There's a lot of like studies and research linked in bibliography. So if you are into the scholar kind of take, this book and Venus and Aphrodite by Bettany Hughes might be your thing, to just have a foundation to start from. Because there's a lot about Venus and Aphrodite. You might have noticed in my video of Vesta, Vesta is very essential and to the point in myths. There's just one myth, she doesn't get involved with the rest. There's a lot instead on Aphrodite and Venus, not only mythologically, so from at the very least the 8th century BCE, before current era. So we're talking about 2,800 years ago. But especially on the Monica Cyrino book, there's a lot of discussion and exploration on why do we think that Aphrodite might actually come or be connected to Astarte to Inanna to Ishtar, or even the connections to Ushas, which is an Indo-European goddess, which I think is part of the Rig Veda, so we're talking about, at that point, Indian deities. And yet, like, there are the connections to all of this, so if you want to delve into that, the book of Monica Cyrino and Bettany Hughes might be your thing. In terms of neo-paganism work with Aphrodite, I've heard a lot about the work of Laurelei Black, but I couldn't find their books. They're currently taken off Kindle, which, as you know, is my preferred way of reading, so I haven't had a chance. But I've seen her mentioned in the work of Irisanya Moon, who wrote the Aphrodite book for Pagan portals, and she cites Laurelei Black, but unfortunately I couldn't see the original. The book of Irisanya Moon on Aphrodite is the one that actually starts, as I mentioned at the beginning, with, oh, I actually was a bit reticent to get close to Aphrodite because he seemed vapid and weak. And at the same time, she goes into the side that seems petty or a troublemaker and still tries to find some positives in it, which it's true. There is this energy. However, as I explained before, even with the justification of why that can be a good thing, it's not how I see things. I think it's interesting to read how other people live their relationship with this goddess, whether it's the same thing that you do or not. If you then want a book that is just literally neo-paganism, witchcraft, rituals, let's get down to business, David Thompson has a book on working with Aphrodite. It's very, very thin. Well, not physically, I've never seen it physically, I just have it on Kindle, but it's relatively short, and it's just instructions on rituals. He has a variation on the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram to sort of start a circle and then start meditations. It's very practical and it's useful for the practicality of it. It's not my absolute favorite, but if you don't know where to start and you want to do a meditation to get in touch with her, it gives you a good foundation to get there. Consider that I'm saying that, again, as the witch with the least aptitude to actually meet, talk, feel deities, entities, and spirits. I do stuff, I hope it works for the best, I'm never quite sure. As a last note, there is an aspect of Venus that I hadn't considered until recently when Raven made me notice. And accidentally afterwards, I sort of found confirmation of it. So, as you might have known or learned from my video on why am I a witch, one of the reasons is my thanatophobia. I have a very, very huge issue with that anxiety, basically. And one day we go out on a walk and in the same walk we first find a flower that I identify and turns out to be called the flower of the dead. And then when we were coming home, a piece of tree falls in front of me and I recognize it as being a cypress, the tree of the dead. And that freaked me out. And Raven suggested that, I think at the time she was researching on Kore, Persephone and the matter, and she suggested, I think there might be an aspect of Venus. And true enough, afterwards I researched a bit, I put together, like, you know, the theory of Eros and Thanatos, where the opposite of love is not hate, it's death, because without love you don't fear the nothingness, because if you love something, you want it, and vice versa. If you don't have attachment or care, you do not fear death. Did you know that one of Aphrodite's Venus sacred connections is with the pomegranate? You would expect that it's just Persephone, but no, it's Venus as well. So after that, I started to consider the, I guess, war and death aspect as well, and so I do try to work through my fears, considering that. And I know that it's not a common thing. I can't find an epithet of Venus, of Aphrodite, that talks about her connection to death specifically. There's war at best. Yeah, the aspect of Venus, love, and death is something that I personally am trying to work with. So if that is by any chance something that you had a feel for as well. I would love to hear what your experience is, what your interest is, and how you work through it. Because I wouldn't have thought, but then finding out that the pomegranate is also sacred to Venus sort of made me feel like, see, it wasn't as weird as it seemed. I think this video is obsequiously, rightfully long, because there's a lot to be said about Venus and Aphrodite, and we have skimmed over the myths. But yeah, I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, leave them here in the comments. And until next time, I hope we can X the patriarchy together, because there's a need for it. If you think that they turned around most of the myths to make her catty and petty with the power of life and death that she had, no, the patriarchy needs taken down.